this too through Zoom as well, and we want to have a little roundtable discussion about it. Because you just watched yesterday, inflation hit 9.1%, the highest it's been since 1981. And one of the sharpest increases is caused by the soaring price of gas. And it's not the producer's problem, it's not the gas station's problem. This is really, Joe Biden did that. From the #1 first day he was in, he started attacking this industry. The sad thing about this is it's American jobs, it's American security, it's American families who are now having to spend $5,000 more this year. And where is he today? He's in a foreign country begging for them to produce. And we all know around this table, America can produce, America can become energy independent. It makes America stronger with better jobs, but we also know environmentally it's better for the environment if America produces this. And so I can't understand why Joe Biden continues to do this. I can't understand why Nancy Pelosi follows along. But here in the Republican conference, we are working on ways to make sure we are going to be energy independent. We're preparing for that day if we are fortunate to become in the majority or we can pass the bills that will change the course of history. And America will be stronger, the world will be safer, gas prices will be lower, and the environment will be in a better position. So today I have a lot of good friends here that are going to work with us on it from all different areas. And the one thing we do need from the basis is not just more production, it's more pipelines, it's more refineries, kind of all the above in the aspect of where we go. And some of the brightest minds are here with me. One of the individuals who's been leading this charge is our whip, Steve Scalise from Louisiana, but he's been running the heat team and been working hard on this issue and been taking a lot of members out on tours as well, educating them on the importance of energy in America. Steve, let me turn to you.
Well, thank you, Kevin. Appreciate you putting this group together, and appreciate all of our guests who are with us as well. The #1 concern you hear people talk about in every district I go to, not just in Southeast Louisiana where I represent, is that gas prices are too high, and they know that they shouldn't be too high. And they're too high because Joe Biden, as a candidate, said that he was going to end drilling in America, end it offshore, end it onshore, and he went after oil and gas companies in America. He also, at the same time, started begging other countries to produce our energy for us. It started with Russia. You know, before the invasion of Ukraine, we were getting more of our oil from Russia under Joe Biden, and in fact, Putin was making about $700 million a day selling his oil to America in Europe in the buildup to the Ukraine war. And so because Joe Biden shut down production in America, there's a cost to that. And the cost we feel, and especially hardworking families, lower middle income families, is the pain at the pump when they pay $4 and now $5 plus a gallon. That really is hurting families' ability to go on vacations, to go to the grocery store to buy things that are more expensive. But if you look at what it's done, it's emboldened a lot of our enemies around the world. And so there's no reason Putin should have been making all of that money. Then he turned to Iran. He's turned to Venezuela. He's getting on Air Force One. You saw him fly yesterday to the Middle East. Tomorrow he's going to be meeting with the Saudi princes, begging them to produce more oil when we can produce it here. Everybody knows that. And the real important point is no one does it better. No one does it cleaner, lower carbon footprint. If oil's made anywhere in the world, the best place to make it and produce it is in America. We should be doing more of it. I will just show this chart because I don't think it can be made enough. Again, Joe Biden's flying 5,700 miles on Air Force One, which no solar panels on the wings. It's all jet fuel to Saudi Arabia. Port Fourchon in my district is where deep water drilling in the Gulf of Mexico emanates from. And they could produce all of the needs for America that are being unmet right there. I know some of my other colleagues from other states that produce energy, whether it's Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico. We've got the ability to produce our energy. We ought to be doing it here, not going to foreign dictators to get it there. Appreciate your leadership, Kevin.
Let's turn over to Garrett Graves, who's done a great deal of work on this and runs one of our task forces and our select committee.
Thank you. And Kevin, thanks for putting this together. I want to thank everybody for participating, and Steve, thank you for your efforts. Look, it's really important that we look at this from an individual perspective. And right now, basically 1 in every 4 Americans have, over the past year, have been unable to meet their own basic needs because of what's happening with energy costs. We have seen a doubling of gasoline costs to refuel your vehicle. We have seen a near tripling of natural gas costs, which in some cases there's a little bit of a lag there in higher electricity bills. But let me go back to what I said before. 1 in every 4 Americans have been dealing with this false choice of having to decide, am I going to buy groceries this week? Am I going to fuel my car? Am I going to pay my electricity bill? Am I going to get some of these fundamental medicines that I need just to be able to sustain my life? I mean, these are false choices. And what's the worst thing about this is, as Leader McCarthy said, these are unforced errors. These are self-imposed crises that this administration and that this Democrat Congress has caused. Just yesterday in the House Natural Resources Committee, we're all well aware that this administration, that this leadership in Congress, that they're opposed to oil and gas. And as Leader McCarthy said, as Whip Scalise said, President Biden, Secretary Haaland have made it crystal clear from the beginning that they were opposed to oil and gas. But yesterday, it's not just oil and gas, they're also opposed to renewable energy. It is none of the above. President Obama said all of the above. It is none of the above under this administration. Just yesterday, shutting down access to things like lithium, graphite, cobalt, nickel, copper, critical minerals that are needed for renewable energy. There's going to be a 400 to 600% increase in renewable energy. Graphite and lithium alone, a 4,000% increase. And we watched yesterday shutting down access to those minerals right here in the United States. So what does that mean? It means even higher prices. Now look, so let's look at what this administration has done, whether, as Steve mentioned, it's a near tripling of dependence upon Russian oil that we saw last year under this administration. It's a 6.3% increase in emissions, as McCarthy noted, whereas under President Trump we saw a reduction in emissions. So doubling in prices, increase in emissions, and energy insecurity. What are you achieving here? Now lastly, we're watching as they come in and they say, okay, we're going to ban Russian oil, which absolutely, we never should have become dependent upon it. But look at what's happened. You've actually watched Vladimir Putin get a 50% increase. He's making more money off of his oil today, and guess who the primary buyer of that oil, of that energy is? It's China. So China is getting a discount on oil because of its Russian oil. They're getting a discount on the oil. Vladimir Putin's making more money, and it's dirtier energy. I mean, this is the most insane energy policy that I've ever seen in my life, and I'm going to circle back one last time as I close. And at the end of the day, who is this impacting most? It's impacting those who can least afford it. It's forcing people into energy poverty as a result of unforced errors. Other countries would kill for the resources that we have right here in the United States, would kill for the oil and gas, for the coal, for the resources we have. We can do it cleaner, we can do it safer, we can do it cheaper, and this administration is forcing millions of Americans into poverty as a result of their flawed policies. So we're looking forward to being able to turn the corner on this and to actually play our cards right, to use the resources we have here in the United States, help bring costs down, help achieve energy affordability, and help ensure the protection of the environment as we move forward.
And let's turn to Bruce Westerman, another leader in this industry that we're looking at, a ranking member. Bruce?
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you for holding this roundtable. It's great to be here and to talk about an issue that's front and center on everybody's mind here in America, and that is the high cost of energy. It's not just the high cost of energy, we're starting to look at the scarcity of energy. And you know, when you look at this administration and the Democrats on the left, they have an energy agenda, but they have absolutely no plan. And what our country needs right now is a plan, and I know that Republicans are going to offer a plan on how to make energy affordable, reliable, and as clean as it can be. And we know that a strong economy and a clean environment, a healthy, safer, cleaner environment, are not mutually exclusive. They actually go hand in hand. And we have a lot of truth behind us on this issue, but we're also going to put a lot of meat on the skeleton, a lot of legislation, a lot of pressure on the administration when we get in the majority. And you know, we have an attitude of, I think of a kids show that my kids used to watch called Bob the Builder, and it had a little jingle to it that said, "Bob the Builder, yes we can." And we have a yes we can attitude. This administration and the far left, their attitude is no we can't and no you can't. Garrett talked about our resources hearing where Even the critical minerals and elements that we need to build a carbon-free environment, they want to leave that in the ground. It's the answer to everything is no, not in our backyard. And we are blessed with resources. We can do better. We will do better. And it's been great to work with Kathy on a bill like the American Energy Independence from Russia Act. We're working on more robust legislation. I'm excited about the future. I just hope that this administration and the left, whoever's making the decisions, I hope that they don't continue running our country into the ground before we're able to get in a position to make a real difference and change. So thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. And let's really turn to the Bob, who's the real builder, who's leading the committee and all. But I guess it'd be Bob E. But Kathy McMorris-Rogers, who has led it for quite some time on Energy and Commerce, the ranking member, has done a tremendous job where a lot of the policy comes out of this committee, and look forward to you being chair and getting this done. Kathy?
Thank you, leader. Thank you to all my colleagues. The United States of America has done more to lift people out of poverty, raise the standard of living, led in innovation and technology breakthroughs in every sector. And as you think about how that has happened, energy has been foundational to it all. It's foundational to our way of life. Certainly the cost of living issues are at forefront. Every time someone fills up with gasoline right now, they're being reminded of how the cost of living has increased. And the Republicans, we are anxious to unleash American energy. I'm proud to be here today with leading American energy producers, oil and natural gas, and we are the largest energy producing country in the world, and we need to unleash American energy. It's so important to every part of our lives. It's our standard of living, it's our way of life, it's our economic competitiveness, it's important to geopolitical aspect, our security and our standing in the world. And so energy and American leadership is so important. And yes, we have worked on numerous bills, and it's been unfortunate to see the Biden administration and the majority in the House, led by Speaker Pelosi, say no. They are shutting down American energy producers, and I know we'll hear more about that today. But we spent decades working to become energy independent, and we finally achieved that goal in 2020. And to see us turn in this other direction is devastating. It's very destructive. And it's hurting American families first and foremost. And I know energy workers are anxious to go to work and unleash American energy, and we're anxious to do that on Capitol Hill. And look forward to the discussion today.
Well, thank you, Kathy. And I want to turn to three freshmen who come from their districts where energy is produced. So they've seen firsthand what it looks like when America is producing and when an administration comes in. The systematic change that happens. I'm going to turn to August Pfluger first down in the Permian Basin of what he sees, not only knowing the potential, but what has been left on the table with this Biden administration and what we've been heard. So, August?
Leader McCarthy, thanks for convening this group. I don't think there's a more important discussion right now going on in our country, and agree with everything that's been said. I'm going to take a slightly different angle on it and make 2 points. Number one, we're in an environment, in the geopolitical environment, that as somebody who served in the military for 2 decades, I don't think we have faced this severity of threats since World War II, and maybe even ever. And there is no reason why we would be hamstringing ourselves on the most basic and foundational piece of security, which is energy. And if we think back to World War II, energy and the resources, the abundant resources that we have right here in this country is what lifted us into a position and gave us a competitive advantage to go and win and to fight the evil forces around the world and to prevent those forces from taking over and to fight for freedom. And so as somebody who represents the large portion of the Permian Basin, and along with my colleague here, Ms. Harrell, I've said it many times, it's time for Joe Biden to put Midland over Moscow. It's time for Joe Biden to understand the resources we have. The second point that I will make is when we hear this word energy transition, I strongly disagree with this. We are in an energy expansion. Yes. In the next 15 years, the world population will grow by another 1 billion people. The demand for electricity alone will increase in conservative estimates by 50%. It is going to take all available sources of energy that we have. The President of the United States is complicit in absolutely taking those resources off the shelf and preventing, as was said by Garrett Graves, preventing especially those who can least afford it from having the resources, the available resources of energy. We have lifted 1 billion people out of energy poverty in the last decade, and we can do even more. And in the next 15 years, with another 1 billion people, every available resource is going to have to be used. Thank you for convening this group. We have the resources, and it's time for Joe Biden to stop going to Saudi Arabia and start going to Odessa, Texas, and other producing areas.
Exactly. And let's turn to Stephanie Bice from Oklahoma. She understands energy quite well, worked very hard on this subject and into the future as well. Stephanie?
Thank you, Leader McCarthy, for bringing us together for this incredibly important conversation. A couple of points that I think are noteworthy. For the freshmen that are here today, the very beginning of our term was the president being sworn in and then launching what I believe to be a full-on assault on the oil and gas industry. It was canceling permitting, it was canceling leases, and you immediately saw the impact of that on the price of gasoline and price of oil. And what's really sort of shocking to me is that the Democrats want to blame everyone else for the increases. It's been Putin's price hike, it's been the oil and gas companies' price gouging. They never want to take responsibility for the actions that they've put forward. And I think that the American people know better. They see what's happening at the pump every day and at the grocery store every day, and they're angry and they're frustrated, and they should be, because states like mine, as well as others here at the table, have the ability to make this country American energy independent once again. But we are being hamstrung by the policies of Biden and the administration. I want to make a couple of points here. August sort of alluded to this, and that is, this is a national security issue too. I sit on the House Armed Services Committee, and we cannot be reliant on countries like Venezuela, Iran, and others for our energy needs. We need to be able to produce clean, affordable, reliable energy here in this country. And the other point I think is being discussed right now pretty vehemently is the Strategic Petroleum Reserve and the amount that has been taken out. I grabbed some data this week and found out that 94 million barrels of oil have been withdrawn from the SPR since March. We are now at 485 million barrels, the lowest levels in 37 years. And the SPR was created to help us in cases of national emergency, disaster declaration of some sort, and I think August made the point that if we come to a situation where we have some sort of conflict, we need these reserves. But instead, this administration wants to deplete that, and it's going to be costly in the long run. So thank you for bringing us together today. I look forward to a robust conversation.
Thank you, Stephanie. And let's turn to Yvette Harold from New Mexico. She watched the very first day when the president took those actions and then shut down on federal lands. And it's all different perspectives. It's not just the production. People don't understand the amount of taxes people pay. Her education system of New Mexico, what was it, 20% was going to be cut in this process too. Yvette?
Yes, and thank you for having this. And these are such valid points. And I think the more we can have these conversations where the American people can get a better understanding, because let's face it, I mean, they have been misled for the last 18 months, you know, especially when we start talking about permitting. You know, the administration will say there's 9,000 unused permits, but really what they're not telling the American people is that there are a lot of other steps that go into the permitting process. And in a state like New Mexico, which has one of the highest oil producing counties in the nation, we have public land, we have private land, we have state land. It's very different. And it's sad that some of our producers are waiting over 400 days for a permit. And we can get one from the state in 7 days. But I really want to thank all of my colleagues around this table who signed a letter to this president. We had 68 signers reminding this administration of the importance of our energy independence, asking him, instead of taking the trip over to Saudi Arabia, hand in hand, Why don't you take a trip around the United States to our energy producing states, meet our constituents who actually do know how to produce energy cleaner, more affordably, and can help the American people? Because if we want to be honest, there are two things I think we need to be thinking about, which no one is talking about yet. This impact of energy loss in our country, what are we going to be looking at in terms of food scarcity or shortages because of the number of farmers and ranchers who are unable or cannot afford the fertilizers, the diesel? I met with some seed producers just recently, and they said their annual sales now are anywhere from 40 to 60% less than the norm, because farmers just cannot make that commitment because of the expense of diesel. So we're not even having the conversations of what these policy decisions look like, this one-party rule, this war on our American energy, what it looks like in terms of not just the costs at the pump, but our resources and our food availability in the future. And I believe this is something that is not being talked about. But the letter, I was so proud of all of us for signing it and asking this president to look at the policies that this conference has put forward. We've put dozens of good energy policies forward with the environment in mind, with climate in mind, with doing our production access healthier for the environment, cleaner, just like we know we do. But it's time the American people get the real truth and there's more transparency. And again, having a conversation like this where the American people can understand what the long-term outlook is for our nation, not only just it's frightening to think that we would be reliant on foreign energy. We should not ever be in that position. I agree with you, August. But what does it look like on the grocery shelves 12 months from now? So thank you for letting us talk about this in a very open and honest way for the American people.
You know, we sat and we talked to a lot of policymakers right now, people in Congress. I want to turn to those who are actually on the front line of trying to produce, trying to run a company. We've watched what these policies from this Joe Biden have done. Raise inflation, raise the price of gas. You know, the one thing, August Pfluger, he's a humble man. He flew F-22, served in the military for almost 20 years. The military makes you strong. Dependency makes you weak. If there's anything we've learned through Europe and others. And America, if America is energy independent, the world is safer. If America is energy independent, we're economically stronger. As Garrett Graves will tell you so many times as well, natural gas in America is 41% cleaner than Russian natural gas. So environmentally we're sound. We just don't understand the philosophy behind this attack on energy. And so for those on the front line in production, I want to first thank you, Tom Jordan, for being here in person. You're on the front line doing a premier energy company with natural gas and oil. Talk to us a little bit about the challenges you face and kind of advising us on things that we need to do to make it more productive and get the price of not just fuel down, because it goes into everything that we do, from our asphalt to the ink to our phones. I mean, energy is much more than all of what we're talking about as well. So I want to turn over to Tom Jordan.
Thank you, Leader McCarthy. It's nice to be in a room like this. I don't get a chance to be among this kind of crowd, so I'm going to relish in it for a few minutes. No, it's, you know, history teaches us some things. You know, Europe is in a mess right now, an absolute crisis that has geopolitical implications for the United States. And if you look to where it started in 2002, when Europe started shutting down their own production declined, and Russian imports increased. To today, they're held hostage to Russia. Well, what happened in the United States in 2002? That was the beginning of the shale revolution. In 2002, our industry was written off for dead. Production was on decline in the United States. It would never come back. We were held hostage to OPEC. Our industry was in decline and written off for dead. And because of entrepreneurialism, free markets, contract law, private property rights, something happened in America that was uniquely American. And the energy revolution came, and all of a sudden America became energy independent. America had the lowest price of energy in the world. We forget that it was the oil and gas industry that led the way in the financial crisis of 2008, 2009. And it's a remarkable story. And if you look at the parallel between what happened in Europe and what happened in the United States, the tragedy is we're running the risk of repeating what happened in Europe. we have tremendous obstacles in front of us right now. You know, you mentioned federal permits. We need infrastructure, but we also need the bashing to stop. You know, I mean, it's amazing to me that the President of the United States is calling on the E&P producer in the United States to increase production 15 months after killing the Keystone XL pipeline. Right. That is, and I'm not, you know, I don't come here as a partisan. I come here as an American. You know, and my peers, I'm very proud of the industry I work in. We want to help. This industry has tremendous capacity to respond to the crisis in front of America and the world. I think we have a geopolitical opportunity and a responsibility, quite frankly. If we want the free world to be remaining free, American energy needs to be evangelized. And it's the best thing to do for the global climate. So, you know, I come here as an American. I love our industry. We are ready to help, but we need a little bit of a fair way. And, you know, if the bashing could just stop, we'll get to work. But thank you.
Hey, John, I want to turn to Stephanie. She's got an individual here, too, that's one of her constituents that's working into the industry as well. Stephanie?
Thank you. And I am thrilled to have Jeff Wilson with Devon Energy with us this morning. Jeff is the Vice President of Government Affairs and has been in the industry for many years. We got to know each other several years ago when I was in the state legislature, and he really has a great understanding of what is happening on the ground. And I will say that companies like Devon contribute to about 45% of the energy that's produced in Oklahoma currently. So, Jeff, let's talk a little bit about what you're seeing from the policy perspective.
Thank you, Congresswoman, and thank you, Mr. Leader, for the invitation. It's hard to follow Tom Jordan. You know, when it comes to talking about energy, he's absolutely right. You know, this isn't a question of resources. We have the resources in America to help supply the world. It's a question of commitment, and it's a question of making sure that the world knows that we're ready to serve them. We can serve the American public and the world with our energy here, but it requires a commitment. It requires to regular order on federal lands when it comes to permitting and infrastructure development. And it also requires, as Tom said, a lack of rhetoric that bashes the industry. Yeah. You know, people listen when people in power talk. And when people in the administration, such as the president or those who work for him, denigrate the industry or talk about profiteering in a time of war, it has an impact not only on us and the people who work for us, but our investors as well. Wall Street listens when this administration talks about ending fossil fuel consumption in the United States. And that's an important thing to remember, that it's not simply a question of reserves or ability, but a question of commitment. We have that commitment in our industry. We're willing to step into the fray. We're willing to step into the mix, and we have time and time again. Tom mentioned the shale revolution beginning in 2002. Our company has a unique role in that with the development of the combination of hydraulic fracturing with horizontal drilling in the Barnett Shale. It really kick-started this, you know, abundance that we have in the United States now. We can do that again. We have the technical know-how, we have the expertise, we have the commitment. We need the partnership from those in power to step into the fold and say, this is the way forward. That's very important, and it's increasingly vital as we know that our partners around the world, those in Europe, need us. Natural gas in Europe costs 10 times more today than it does in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. And that's a choice about policy. We could find ourselves in that same situation if we make that same mistake. And so it's critically important that we don't. Thank you again.
You raised some really good points. I mean, Europe would not be in the position they are today. The world would not be in this war. And there's so many similarities to 1936, 1939 to what's happening today with what Putin is doing and what Hitler did. If America was able to do exactly what God blessed us with, our resources. And there's so many times Garrett reminds us, just from an environmental basis, if America does it, the world's cleaner. And if you think about it, the world is safer from the aspect of what's going on instead of a Putin using leverage in this basis. And when you think being dependent on somebody else, allowing Putin to have getting more money from oil, but giving China a discount on it to compete against us, we're harming ourselves. Right. And our president today, as we're sitting around the room here in Washington, D.C., talking about ways and policies we can do this, he's sitting in Saudi Arabia asking them to produce something. But what people need to understand is oil goes into more than just your gasoline. And having been from California, we've watched these policies and what they've done to us. As we go through this summer, we're worried in California of brownouts. Why? Because the change in policy. In California, we can produce more, but we've watched Gavin Newsom come in, reduce production by 20%. How does he do that? He used Dogger at the time to not renew permits to people who have already been producing it. The #1 producer of oil in California is Ecuador. But when he lowered it by 20%, that's 80,000 barrels a day, he started taking 50,000 barrels from Putin. And I happen to come from an area that produces a lot. We've got an individual, Mike Gooding, who not only produces, they have a refinery as well. And this is where people need to understand. His refinery, much of what he refines goes into our asphalts, our roads, goes into the ink print for our packaging and others. All that has gone up in price. But we're sitting there and can produce more, but we have our own government denying us that. But when you deny it, it still comes from somewhere else. Makes another country stronger, makes the environment dirtier, and really supplies our adversaries with resources we shouldn't be doing, and takes away jobs from America. So, Mike, you want to join us?
Absolutely. I just appreciate very much invited to this. Thank you, Leader McCarthy, and everyone else. Guys' wisdom and oversight, and just hopefully you're pushing forward on positive policy making on this. And I can tell you, in California, we produce 375,000 barrels of crude oil a day. We've been knocked down to that level. Our daily use in California is 1.8 million barrels. And I heard earlier, it's a national security issue, and it really is. We're in a critical point, and California is even worse off because we live in an energy island in California. We're not hooked up to any interstate crude oil pipelines in the U.S. We're out here on our own island by ourselves. So SBR, in essence, this is how crazy it is, doesn't even do us any good if we have to release from it to support California, because there's no way to get it here other than tanker, which is the majority of the way we get all of our crude oil every day. So if there's a disruption in any type of tanker traffic or anything, California, and I've said this before, there could be an anarchy in our state. It's insanity how exposed we are out here. And like Leader McCarthy said, majority of our crude that we make out here goes to ink oils and packaging, goes to hospitals, on equipment. It goes to transform oils. When there's a national emergency from a hurricane, they call on our refinery to send as much transform oil as they can because of the rebuilding of the electrical infrastructure. And asphalt is another key part. Whether we're going to drive electric cars or gasoline-powered cars, we still need to build roads, and we still need to repair roads. And so a great number of it is asphalt that we use. So anyway, the time is of the essence. We have 25 plus agencies that regulate us in California, and many of them overlap, and it's been real restrictive. And I can just tell you from a personal standpoint, from our company, we have worked on a permit for this is our 4th year. We spent over $1.5 million, and we have yet to receive that permit for our injection. And what's happening in California, not only are they not approving drilling permits, which we have, I think it's 1,200 now, plus drilling permits that they will not approve. They will not approve our underground injection permits when we're trying to go deeper with our produced water to make everything more environmentally sound. And they won't approve that either because they know if they can control our injection, withhold it, they can also hold us up on our production side. So anyway, that's my initial thoughts for you guys today.
Thank you, Mike. That's just a different perspective to see how broad and based that we need this industry, and it goes into so much more. And I don't think people really quite understand that. And the sad part is we've seen from California with Gavin Newsom what Biden is trying to do. We know what the outcome will be, and we can't allow that to happen on a federal basis. Steve, you got a guest with us today.
Yeah, Kevin, I've got a constituent of mine who has been very active in the Gulf of Mexico, and as we know, some of the deepest reserves that we have in the United States are in the Gulf of Mexico. And in fact, when President Biden prepares to go to Saudi Arabia to beg them to produce more oil, it was just days ago that the French President Macron told Joe Biden that they don't have enough capacity to give us what we need in Saudi. Now, why President Biden couldn't get that information from his own energy advisors, he had to find that out from the French president, tells you something about the failed leadership under President Biden. He should have fired all of his advisors that day. The fact that they're so ill-informed about global economics on energy. But even if Saudi had more capacity, one rig in the Gulf of Mexico could exceed what they could produce. And we've seen the problems with permitting, the inability to get permits, not only for pipelines, of course, the Keystone XL pipeline is the one that gets the most attention. There hasn't been a single new pipeline authorized, permitted in America to move energy anywhere throughout our country, which makes us more dependent on foreign sources. The subsea activity and infrastructure that's needed to build out a well, even if you've got a lease to drill. You also need to do seismic. You need to know where the energy is. It might cost you $100 million to drill a well in a 9-mile square block. Well, you're surely not going to guess. You're going to do seismic data testing to find out where the resources are. They haven't given permits to do new seismic since Joe Biden took office. These are all deliberate attempts to shut down American energy as he goes abroad begging them to produce oil. So, Joe, I know we've got Joe Limekuhler, who is the COO of Beacon Offshore. They're a great producer. They deal with a lot of fields in the Gulf of Mexico, a great energy company that Joe's been an advisor of mine on energy policy for a long time too, headquartered in Covington, Louisiana. Joe, why don't you share with us your experiences?
Thank you very much, Congressman. It's great to hear from you. It's a pleasure to talk to you guys today. I have a friendly audience for a subject that's very near and dear to my heart. As a nation right now, we're on a journey transitioning away from hydrocarbon to renewables. And quite frankly, it's trying to be done at a rate that's simply not feasible without significant pain and impact to the way of life and even our national security. Leader McCarthy mentioned hydrocarbons are essential. From medical equipment, ironically, even masks and a lot of the things we use to stay safe from COVID, our TVs, our cell phones, our furniture, our homes, everything. It makes up 83% of the energy that we currently use, with renewables around 10%, with solar and wind only half of that. So the degree and rate of change away from hydrocarbons, it needs to take into and assess the impact we're going to have when we lose those sources of energy. And I just don't feel like that conversation's taken place. The federal government, as well as the financial community's desired rate of change to move, is simply actually unmanaged. And I think it's really borne out by what the U.S. Energy Information Administration, the EIA, puts out in their annual energy outlook. And I tuned in this year through a conference in NOIA, where I also serve on the board, National Ocean Industries Association. And I was startled. 3 times they mentioned they're nonpartisan, they're not political. And when they outlaid their outlook for 2022 all the way out to 2050, I was shocked, because I actually expected to see the nation's reliance on hydrocarbons decline. And it didn't decline. It actually increased. Yes, renewables are going to go up significantly. They'll actually be greater than coal and nuclear by 2050. But we're actually going to need more oil and gas in 2050 than we need today. And the level of activity and the level of investment is simply not there to even replace the decline we see in our natural production. So we're headed for a lot of pain and suffering that I don't think we really appreciate. And I've been to a lot of charm schools from various companies throughout my career where I learned how to be a better manager. And the one thing that always stuck with me is that people, and I believe companies, take action based upon what they see is the future. So what do we see right now? Well, we see limited support for continued oil and gas development. Offshore leasing is in question. I know the administration released a notional plan that stated we'll have a lease sale in 2023 in the offshore Gulf of Mexico, and we'll have 2 lease sales a year going forward. But they also put some caveats on it that are kind of concerning. There's a 90-day comment period that just opened up, and in that comment period, the administration wants to hear from all of the stakeholders. And the way a lot of the folks on the other side who are really not pro oil and gas, they're going to flood it with comments. And they're going to take those comments, and I think there's a risk that we may not have any lease sales based upon the comment feedback. So that's a challenge. Limited support for continued offshore oil and gas development. We've got a challenging environment for capital. Beacon's a relatively new company. We've been around 3 years as an operator, able to physically operate oil and gas production offshore. And we were able to secure $1.4 billion in financing to put in place a project called Shenandoah. Shenandoah will deliver 100,000 barrels a day of oil from just 4 wells. And it's amazing when you look at the deepwater Gulf of Mexico and how productive it is with a limited footprint. The oil and barrels that come out of the Gulf of Mexico are the lowest carbon footprint barrels on the planet. To put that into perspective for you, if you took the largest 18 producing platforms in the deepwater Gulf of Mexico, you put them all together right next to one another, you get an area of 9 city blocks. And out of that surface area of 9 city blocks, you get 10% of this country's oil. 10% of the largest producer in the world coming from 9 city blocks. That's incredible. That's the lowest carbon footprint barrels there are. And it's ironic that we feel like we're being restricted to develop the lowest carbon intensity barrels on the planet at a time when it's actually totally needed by the nation, and you can argue by the world. So going forward, it's been mentioned by other leaders from the industry, gosh, if we could just see some support, if we could just quit being demonized, it would certainly encourage us to go forward and do the things that are necessary in a safe and responsible way to deliver clean energy to the country, which is absolutely needed. And if we can't do it, I shudder to think what the consequences might be.
Very good points, because here we are, we know we're going to need more production. They're doing everything to decrease production, but they're also going after the capital so people can make those investments. It's not government making the investments. People are taking risks, just as you did in 2002. And if we don't do it, somebody else is going to do it in another country. And we, with private property, we're the one place in the world that can do this. And we can do it in an environmentally sound way. I mean, you just made a very good point with those 9 city blocks. I apologize. I know Steve and I are going to have to step out. We're going to honor a World War II vet, but I know August Pfluger has another special guest here, and I'm going to turn it over to Garrett Graves to have the discussion going afterwards.
Well, Leader, thanks again. This has been a great discussion, and I think you're right. The environment that we see right now, one of the tools of the assault is the ESG, environmental, social, and governance assault. And even if people want to invest, there's such a lack of certainty that it makes it difficult to invest. And I believe that it makes our country similar in a political risk type mindset to a country like Yemen or another country that's so unstable, where you have investments that are made and then they're canceled. I'd like to introduce somebody to this group that, if you've been to Midland, Texas, you've met Steve Pruitt. Steve was the senior vice president at one of the largest independent operators, Concho Resources. He is now the chairman and executive officer of Elevation Resources. Not only is he a technical expert, but he also understands the strategic impact of this. And Steve, I'd like you to talk about your experiences in the Permian Basin that produces 40% of the country's oil at 5.2 billion barrels a day right now, and maybe talk a little bit about the differences that we're seeing between the federal lands and the private lands, and then if you can touch on the ESG issues and the lack of political certainty and the predictability that really is detracting and depriving the needed investment that we have. So Steve, welcome to the group.
Thank you. It's an honor to speak before you and to see so many familiar faces. I wish I were there with you in person. In addition to being CEO of Elevation, which is 9 years old and owned by East and West Coast institutions, you'd be shocked at who some of our owners are and who some of them were who chose to leave, which was fine with me. Independents, I'm vice chairman of the Independent Petroleum Association. Independents make 83% of our domestic oil and 90% of our natural gas. There's about 6,500 independent members like myself in the IPAA, and I'm proud to represent them. I'm going to start with just the impediments of growth and weave in the ESG element to it. Impediments to our growing production in the U.S. Are labor, supply chain issues, regulatory uncertainty, and that's where you all can help us when we take back both houses of Congress, God willing, and access to capital. First on labor, the societal negativity led by our leaders of this country, or I should say our White House and his predecessor, President Obama, has created a labor crisis in the next generation. They do not want to work in our industry. I was talking to my service friends. I was with 140 CEOs of oilfield service companies, E&P companies, and a couple of institutional investors and analysts 2 weeks ago. And we had a very frank exchange for 2.5 days in the Socialist Republic of Telluride, Colorado. And I found that they have a yield of about 1 in 10. So they have 10 people that they recruit to show up to train on a Monday. A couple don't show up, a couple fail drug tests, and by the end of 2 weeks, only one of them is still around. And on an annual basis, they have an 80% turnover rate. That is no way to run a safe business. And those are the people that we, as much like real estate developers, count on to construct the wells that we design. Secondly, on supply chain, there's a 6 to 9 month backlog in accessing tubulars, some of which is related to tariffs or quotas that need to go away. I just heard yesterday from the largest drilling contractor, he has 3 rigs looking for a home because 3 operators dropped the rigs, paid penalties because they don't have casing to case the wells. You cannot drill a well without casing. One of those was the largest driller in the U.S. Our costs are up double for casing. We can't get frac sand. We've had well completions stop because of the lack of access to frac sand. Many mines closed during the COVID period. And then one last thing that people don't understand, President Biden would like us to hit the gas pedal, but there's a 9 to 12 month lag between making the investment decision onshore. And Texas, where I operate, is the friendliest place to, in the shortest cycle time, to drill a well of any environment or regulatory environment in any state in this country. So 9 to 12 months, because of supply chain issues, the difficulty of getting an operating rig, and all the elements that go into constructing a well. Regulatory uncertainty is crushing us. Recently, the EPA announced they're going to likely impose an ozone non-attainment status for the Permian Basin. It seems very arbitrary, which is a great tool for the EPA to use to slow down permits. The Department of Interior, we've already talked about, Congresswoman Harrell knows that very well about the leasing restrictions. The FERC has held up LNG permitting, which could help our European allies at a critical time, as Congressman Pfluger stated, along with other pipelines that could place heating oil in places like Boston and New York instead with clean burning natural gas. And then finally, the SEC has emerged as another impediment to public companies continuing to grow production jobs and increase the taxes and royalties we pay. So when we win back both houses of Congress, we desperately need you to rein in the agencies. And finally, August, you mentioned access to capital. As a private independent who has long expired or ceased to have access to institutional capital, we're all funding our businesses out of cash flow, but there are very few institutional investors continuing to invest in our business. Money center banks have been very clear they will no longer loan to carbon generating companies like ours. They've been calling loans and reducing commitments. Thankfully, regional banks are starting to partially fill that void, but it's clear that our industry has to fund its business out of cash flow. We cannot depend on external sources. And in fact, companies like Tom's and Diamondback, local and large independents are all sending a quarter to as much as half of their free cash flow back to their investors because of the demands from the investment community. August, if I missed anything, let me know. I didn't quite hit the mark.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Steve, thank you. Bruce, I know that you've been spending a lot of time traveling out in the field, talking to folks that are the consumers that are trying to pay these energy costs, but also talking to some of the folks in the industry about the regulatory environment. Could you talk a little bit about some of the feedback you're learning from the energy companies about the regulatory environment, and talk about maybe a comparison of lease sales or energy lands and waters available today, perhaps even compared to the Obama administration?
Yeah, it's a disaster everywhere you look, Garrett, and I have had the opportunity to go out and talk to a lot of producers, and if you haven't seen it this morning, the producer price index came out. If you thought the CPI was bad, the PPI is up 1.1%, blew past the worst expectations of where we were going. So this tells you what's in store for consumers down the road. And I think Joe made a great point that the thing people aren't realizing right now is the long-term effect of this. We're going to create a lag, or we're creating a lag, this administration is, out in the future where there's going to be even tighter supply chains. And the administration, the far left, is taking a multi-pronged, multi-flank approach attacking the domestic energy industry. They're doing it through ESG, trying to cut off funding. They're doing it through the regulatory process. And we saw Biden go after the low-hanging fruit on day one, canceled the Keystone XL pipeline, said there was going to be a moratorium on leases on federal lands and waters. That's the low-hanging fruit. But like Steve said, they're coming after private land as well. They're doing it through the EPA. There's so many examples we could all share, but I think I saw the most egregious overstep of regulations that I've seen or heard of just last week. And, there's a company called Golden Pass. They're building an LNG export facility. The world desperately needs our gas. Yvette talked about agriculture. The price of fertilizer is a global commodity. It's up hundreds of times higher in relation to the price of natural gas than it has been historically. Now, our gas here is cheaper than gas is relatively other places around the world, but we can't move it. The world needs our export capacity. They're building an export facility. It's got 3 trains or process lines in it. With all the supply chain issues, they actually have the equipment on site. FERC, how FERC did this, I don't know. FERC has stopped their progress by saying they can't put the 3,000 construction workers they need on site because of tailpipe emissions from the construction workers' vehicles when they drive to the site. Now, for this administration to attack the industry and villainize them and say they're the fault for higher energy prices, and Joe Biden goes to Saudi Arabia and his administration is stopping progress intentionally, that is unacceptable. It should fire all of us up.
Tailpipe emissions from Air Force One.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I just want to make a comment on the lease sales, because that is such a critical piece of the puzzle for reduction in New Mexico. And there was somewhat of a moratorium on that, but finally when we did see the lease sale last week, it was for 6 parcels. I mean, that is nowhere near where it needs to be. And under the previous administration, it was 20 times more than that. And this investment in our state doesn't just happen overnight. Yeah. This is, like you were saying, Tom, it's long-term investment. There's a lot that goes into the research development and even locating the natural resource alone. But just it's death by 1,000 cuts between all of these issues that are coming at the industry that I would submit is truly the foundation of American exceptionalism, because we have to have this energy to survive as Americans.
Yeah, and just to put things in perspective, during the Obama administration, at this point in time, over 50 lease sales, which was millions of acres of lands and waters, had been issued at this point in time, in 18 months into the administration. And this one, again, effectively 0. Congressman Bice, when you extract natural resources, you generate economic activity, you generate wealth. I know that from the offshore and onshore, some of the rents, the royalties, bonus bids, it ends up being one of the largest revenue streams, non-tax revenue streams for the U.S. Treasury. So this affects, it affects environmental protection, it affects healthcare, it affects infrastructure, but it also affects just the livelihood of Oklahoma citizens and Americans across the country. What are you hearing from home from people that are looking at this dependence on other countries, potentially giving pink slips to Americans, the lack of economic activity? What are your constituents doing?
Well, that's exactly right. And Oklahoma oil and gas industry accounts for about 25 to 30% of total state revenue. So when you start slowing that down, it has a significant impact on the state. I want to actually circle back around to something that I think Joe mentioned, which is sort of ties into this and is incredibly important, and that is workforce. You have a scenario where these rig workers are hard to find. They are not interested in being on the rigs any longer because there's no certainty anymore. This is a commodity market. We all know that, those of us in the room that have been part of the industry or or from states that rely on it, it ebbs and flows. And right now, we are at a point where the long-term outlook for workforce is very difficult. So not only do you have the challenges of capital investment and lack of permitting or refusal to permit, environmental regulations, but now you have a scenario where there may be a challenge for finding the workforce to be able to go drill these wells across the country. And at that point, what do you do then? It's been mentioned many times over, but it is a multifaceted, what I would consider an assault on the industry. And I really liked, I think, the analogy that Bruce used, and that is none of the above. I think that's where we're headed, is a none of the above approach. And in Oklahoma, although we are a top 5 energy producing state, we are also ranked top in things like wind production. So we recognize that we do need an all of the above energy approach, and that approach has brought record low energy prices to our state. Companies are moving to Oklahoma, one of the reasons being for manufacturing. We have a lower cost of energy consumption for those new companies in the state. So I think the great thing about this conversation is we can sit around and sort of highlight the administration's failures, but also look to what can we do to change this direction moving forward, hopefully soon.
Thank you. I know we need to wrap up, but I wanted to cover two more issues. Some of our friends in the private sector that are working on energy solutions right now. First of all, you can look at the Biden administration's energy projections, which I think this is so important. The Biden administration projects that global energy demand is going to go up about 50%. So take everything we're producing now globally and add 50% to it. And just over the next 28 years. And just to break that up in smaller pieces, if you look at developed countries, there's going to be up to a 58% increase in natural gas demand. In developing countries, up to an 80% increase in natural gas demand. So look, let's be very clear. Even the Biden administration is saying we are going to have a surge in demand for energy, and as Stephanie appropriately noted, that means all of the above. But specifically looking at the Biden administration's numbers in natural gas, we are going to see a surge in demand. So when you see the Biden administration reporting this increased demand, but then you look at the regulatory environment that you are told to operate in, you're looking at regulatory certainty. You're trying to make long-term plans. I know for the offshore, for example, it's potentially 10 years from when you do the lease sale to when you actually start producing. Can you talk a little bit about what that uncertainty does when you're trying to make long-term business decisions, and also just that relationship between what the Biden administration says is needed for energy growth and what they're doing to you in terms of just American companies?
Maybe I can start. It may not take 10 years to bring a well onto production on the onshore like it does on the offshore.
Yep.
But as Steve mentioned, it's not just flipping a switch. It takes potentially 12 to 18 months to bring a well to flush production after we begin to drill it. And that doesn't include the planning process that Congresswoman Harrell mentioned on federal lands that takes sometimes up to 400 days to get your permit. And so when you have regulatory uncertainty, when you have this ping pong ball effect between go, go, go and no, 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 you end up in a place where capital allocation becomes very difficult. And that's something that when we sit around the table and we make decisions about what to do, we think very hard about. And certainty would give us the ability to make better plans over the longer term. And I don't know anyone who would disagree with me when I say that that's absolutely important to what we do. And it's critical to our pathway to make decisions. If I can really quickly, I want to just mention a workforce issue because it's so important. We were talking about workforce as well. Our industry, the average wage is over 6 figures in our industry. And there's not a barrier to entry in our industry. We take all comers pretty much. I know Tom and others would agree with me when I say that. One of the things that is great about our industry is with a little bit of hard work, it's one of the few pathways to the middle class that's left in this country for people who want to work hard and really buckle down. And we want to provide that, and we have an opportunity. But when you demonize our workforce and when you talk about how dirty it is or how it doesn't have a future, that really stymies people from wanting to come into our business when they could be making good livings for themselves and provide a pathway for their children up the social ladder. And that's critically important.
Or when they've been hired and they're not allowed to go to the job site because of tailpipe emissions.
Absolutely.
Any of the other, please.
One additional comment. Man, I didn't realize I'm blowing up that big on your screen. One additional comment on the offshore. It's commonly said, oh, it takes 5 to 10 years to get production flowing. And that's often true for a large, major new development. But there are an awful lot of facilities out in the Gulf that are underutilized. And you can do a subsea field and do a subsea tieback in as short as 2 to 3 years, and with relatively still decent chunk of money, a couple $100 million. But your response capability is a lot higher on a large percentage of facilities. And it's a breadth of companies that operate in the deep water with a different breadth of capabilities and a different response time relative to the actual size of the task in front of them. So some of the fields, you can actually go out and acquire a lease next to a producing lease, tie into it, and actually have production in as short as 2 years from the deep water. It's not as long as you think it is all the time.
Of course, onshore, in some cases, within months, you could increase production in some areas depending on infrastructure conditions. But just, my point on the 10 years is just a long lead time in terms of investment certainty. So.
I do get frustrated by that because this problem will be around for the next 10 or 20 years. So if you tell me it takes 4 years to build a pipeline or 4 years to build an LNG terminal, then let's get going. Let's start today because we'll need it when it comes online. There have been some great things said by my peers here. The rhetoric counts. Jeff made that point. I can't remember a time when there were so many contradictory messages coming out of the administration. Within the same 48-hour period, we'll have President Biden calling on the E&P producer to increase production, and then we'll have John Kerry coming out and saying, don't let them use the Ukrainian crisis to build infrastructure. These are long-term investments, and we do need a fair way. Most of the production in the United States is large public companies, of which Jeff and I are public companies. We do have investors, as Jeff said, and when in the same conversation they're saying increase production, but we're going to slap you with a windfall profits tax, and we're not going to let that infrastructure live for the 20 or 30 years it would require, it is completely against all purposes. This is not a complex problem. That's the most frustrating thing. This is a problem that a middle schooler could figure out in 15 minutes.
Tom, you just a quick question. You mentioned that you all are public companies, and all of this ESG, this environmental social governance issue that Congressman Pfluger brought up. If you're a state-owned enterprise, like a company in Saudi Arabia that's owned by the Saudi Arabian government or other countries, how does their ESG reporting?
Look, free markets are phenomenally effective. And one of the ways you see free markets effective in the environmental effort is because we have companies that compete with one another. But I'll say one thing about our industry I'm deeply proud of. When we compete with one another, and so we have trade secrets. We don't want to let anybody know when we make progress because we want to, we're competitive. I love Jeff. I want to beat him. He loves me. He wants to beat me. But I will tell you, when it comes to environmental, our industry has taken the position that if we have an advancement, we must evangelize it with one another because it's good for America. So there's a tremendous amount of collaboration on environmental technology, and America is producing not only the cleanest molecule of natural gas and oil in the world, but we are just getting warmed up. This is a top engineering challenge of our industry. And just get out of our way, and you're going to see remarkable progress.
And the state-owned enterprises disclosure on environmental and social governance looks like what? Blank sheet of paper, no requirements whatsoever. Last question I want to ask Congressman Pfluger, and then have Congressman Westerman wrap up. Congressman Pfluger, you spent much of your life committed to just protecting freedom around the world. When you watch what's happened in Ukraine, and you watch someone like Vladimir Putin come in and just violate sovereignty, and then you think about some of these efforts that the Biden administration is doing, trying to force the United States to reduce emissions. Meanwhile, we're watching Putin just absolutely throw out any international norms or compliance with laws. Of course, in China, you have a similar sentiment, I think, from the administration there, from the leadership there. How does that make you feel when you think about the fact that you spent over 2 decades protecting American freedom, protecting our rights here, and then watching how some of these other countries just don't care? Any reflection there?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's not just me. I think it's every American that looks at how this industry underpins our entire country, our whole economy, everything that we do, and we're proud of the innovation, the technology, the advancements. As somebody who did serve and have had the fortune now to talk to heads of state recently, Prime Minister of Japan, President of Finland, President Zelensky in January of this year, and I sat across the table from him and asked him a simple question: what would Nord Stream, without Nord Stream, what would this mean to you and your country? And he clearly said that Putin and the Russians would not have the impetus or the leverage to invade Ukraine. And when you see the human rights abuses that occur in China and Russia and these other places, and the dependency that Joe Biden is creating from the policy decisions that he is making, it's so un-American, it's anti-American. We have the capability to do this right here at home, as has been said so many times. Garrett, I think we're on a path right now that at some point in time there's going to be a tipping point, and the policy decisions like Europe has made has caused massive disruptions in their economy. 10x on the price of an MCF of gas, 10x on the price of heating your home. The disruptions, they're actually burning coal right now in Germany, where they had tried to go to this all renewable kind of place. So I think around the world, as somebody who served and has worked with foreign allies and partners to preserve freedom, the leaders in the countries around the world are looking to America for leadership right now. And what they're getting is an empty black hole of nothing and no leadership in the direction of security. And the alternative is they're getting dependency on Russia and China, which is obviously completely breaking the bank economically, and it's weakening our national security. So we're in a really bad spot, and we have to reverse course immediately, so that we don't have a massive disruption like Europe is going through.
And it's disrespectful to all those people that have committed their life to service and protecting our freedoms here. I heard the best solution ever for for the Keystone Pipeline. Tell President Biden it's actually named Nord Stream 3. I want to ask Congressman Westerman to wrap up.
Thank you, Garrett. Thank you to everybody that's participated. I think these conversations are very valuable. And just to kind of bring this together, that shows where we're at and what really concerns me about going forward. And it gets back to your question about the offshore leases, the attacks, the unappreciation for the people who are out there who are very patriotic, want to do what's best for this country. I had a conversation with an oil company executive who is responsible to his board of directors and his shareholders. And he wants to invest money that they have in production in the United States, but there's no place to invest it. So he says, I have to go to my board of directors and recommend that we go to Africa. Go to Africa to invest in a market that the demand is high, the supply is low, and prices are high. So he can't invest
environmental standards.
Environmental standards are much higher here. He can't invest in America. He can't invest in American jobs, so he has to take his capital overseas and exporting American wealth so that we can import foreign energy. It's not right. We have to change that, and I know that's what we're all here about.
Well, I want to thank everybody for participating. In addition to our members, Tom and Jeff, Mike, Joe, and Steve, thank you all very much. We are committed to turning the trajectory on this and making sure that we actually put Americans first and American companies first, America's energy resources first, to meet that demand that the Biden administration projects for global energy demand surging over the next 28 years. So thank everyone for